It's a year since rioters stormed the Capitol building in protest at the American election result. President Biden has not united the country, and some fear civil war could eventually break out. Well, someone who knows America very well indeed is Sunday Times columnist and former deputy editor Sarah Baxter. Sarah, you wrote quite an alarming piece yesterday suggesting some now believe that the states could slide into civil war. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and how you came to that conclusion?
Yes, well, if you remember a year ago, there was extraordinary scenes of violence at the Capitol. Some were even carrying the flag of the South, the secessionist flag of Dixie. And but everybody thought that this was, or everybody seemed to think this was a sort of really weird incident that would finish off Donald Trump, that he would be very isolated after that. But in a peculiar way, his strength has grown by refusing to accept that he lost the election, despite overwhelming evidence that he did. He has managed to persuade his base that he is exactly what they always loved him for, a fighter. And he's managed to sort of puff himself up and sort of come back and actually persuade about over 70% of Republican voters that the election was indeed stolen. And there's even been a poll just yesterday around the same time as my own article came out. It came out in the Washington Post saying that about 40% of Republicans and independent voters thought that violence could be justified. And this is an extraordinary situation 12 months on. Now, I live in a corner of Pennsylvania which is quite heavily pro-Trump. And people say to me all the time things, sometimes they say it nonchalantly, sometimes, with a sort of almost eager anticipation that there's going to be civil war in this country in the next 10 years or so. And I look at them and I say, really? And they say, yes. And sometimes I think it's because they're armed to the teeth and there's something that means they quite like to use those weapons. And at other times I just think, actually, the divisions are so profound now between, blue democratic America and red Republican America, between urban America and rural America. And there's so much now surrounding whether or not Joe Biden is president of all America that the dividing lines are getting really entrenched. And it is pretty scary.
I read those polls as well, and that divide, more than a third, nearly 40% of Americans said that they would, use violence against their own government. And as you said, it was concerning because it had increased from just sort of 10% who would have done that in the 1990s. So there has been a movement forward. So what I'd like to know, and what are you hearing on the ground, 6th of January will be the anniversary of Capitol Hill. Is that going to be a flashpoint? What's going to happen on that day?
Well, Donald Trump is going to sort of troll the half of America that didn't vote for him by holding a press conference on that day at his resort in Florida at Mar-a-Lago, basically undoubtedly repeating his claims that the election was stolen, even though he's never actually managed to produce evidence to that effect at all in court or elsewhere. And so he's going to, but it doesn't matter. As I said, he's seen as a fighter. People like the fact that he refuses to accept that he might have lost. And so he's going to rub people's noses in the fact that he's still around. And in contrast, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, very much a hated figure among Trump supporters, is going to hold her own day of sort of prayerfulness, unity and patriotism. And that, in a sense, is itself a dig at the other side, far from being about unity, because, of course, it's the Trump supporters who claim they were the supposed true patriots on that day when they stormed the Capitol. So she's now trying to reclaim the word. But it's always a bad sign, I'm afraid, Esther, when people can't agree on who are the patriots. And the militias used to be a sort of oddball, group. It was, America always had extremists, but as you say, at most it was sort of 10% of the population. But helped by accelerants like social media, the situation has really got to quite an alarming divide now.
And you're right, Trump hasn't gone away. Some might even say he's becoming more popular and he's going to have his own sort of social media platform. But there is the midterm elections coming. What is going to happen there? Predictions for Trump, the Republican Party?
Well, I think the Republican Party will probably do very well unless there's a remarkable turnaround, because ever since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the failure to contain COVID, and the inflationary pressures on the American economy, Joe Biden's been in a lot of trouble. And he's not seen as particularly effective. The truth is, he was never seen as likely to be particularly effective, but he was seen as the anti-Trump candidate. But in the midterm elections, where the presidency is not on the ballot, but control of the the houses of Congress, I think the Republicans will do very well. And Trump will take that as a signal that all is forgiven for January 6th. And he wants to come storming back, get revenge, and win another time.
Now, in the Times today, it says hard left Democrats are plotting to unseat, as they see it, their failing Biden. So they're saying the new sort of left-wing Democrats, whether that's the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are sort of coming forward wanting to oust him. Is that going to happen?
Well, I don't think that a progressive candidate will necessarily win. They've had a series of disastrous slogans like defund the police, which every major city, which had a spike in crime as a result, had to backpedal. The progressives have not had a good year. But what they think is that Joe Biden's going to be too old to stand at the next election. He's already, almost 80. He's going to be 82 at the time of the next inauguration if he wins. And I think they want to make sure they've got a candidate on the ballot who can represent their views. I don't think America is feeling very much like having a progressive candidate at the moment. In fact, a lot of people say it's the progressives who helped to torpedo Joe Biden's Build Back Better bills and helped to have a disaster recently in the Virginia governorship election.
So challengers might want Biden to go, but Biden himself, is he planning to remain in post? I mean, will it be a rerun of the last American election?
I think Joe Biden very much intends to remain in post, no matter what people say about his abilities at this stage. Just remember, he tried and tried to become president for so long. He's waited for this, to become president for half a century. He's not about to chuck it in now. I think he would love to serve 2 terms. And in fact, he's pretty much said so now. And the fact that Kamala Harris has been underperforming as his vice president pretty much clears the route for him to stand again if he wants to. But of course, if he looks like he's going to lose and lose badly, it may be, people have told me it'll be up to his wife, Jill, to tell him enough, time to go, Joe.
And, as we look at the year ahead, people have been given predictions, what's going to happen in 2022. We see big geopolitical shifts. We see people concerned about the new sort of ever-expanding China. We see, as it might be, America weakened. How do you see these shifts and moves globally?
Well, one of the very damaging things about the very hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan is that it did weaken America geopolitically and emboldened its enemies because it was seen that America didn't want any more adventures abroad. So very recently, Joe Biden has been talking tough about Russian maneuvers on the borders of Ukraine, saying that he's just been on the phone yesterday with the Ukrainian president, saying that we're going to stand by you. And he's been delivering similar messages to Taiwan, where China seems very much on maneuvers, having subdued Hong Kong pretty effectively lately. But does anyone believe him? Is he ready for the sort of toughness that might be required against very formidable adversaries? He can talk tough, and he can talk about further sanctions and punitive measures or trade measures, etc., etc. But he's definitely his credibility's definitely been weakened by the events in Afghanistan, no doubt.
And again, talking about China, we've got again world news here in the Times. China's bullying is a warning to Europe, claim the Lithuanians. They're concerned about this, China moving, expanding into other countries across the globe.
Yeah, well, China has an extremely active diplomatic as well as military wing, which is basically all about money, economy, deals, helping countries with debt, etc. And then of course China acts like it owns these countries. So the bill that comes in later turns out to be pretty heavy. Lithuania, of course, has a long experience of having Russia on its border, and is very alarmed there by Putin's. Putin seems incredibly emboldened recently, and that's a worry for them.
And finally, Sarah, have you got any predictions for 2022 that you'd like to leave with us?
Well, I do think that it's going to be a difficult year for the Democrats. I do think the Republicans have got every chance of coming back and holding the majority in Congress, which, particularly in the Senate, which is 50-50 at the moment. And if they do that, it's very difficult for the Democrats to pass anything. And at that point, I think you'll see Donald Trump talking more openly about standing again in 2024. But, a lot of Republicans think he'd be far better off as a kingmaker, that they could really trounce Biden if they backed somebody who said nice things about Trump but wasn't actually Trump, because Trump still remains a divisive figure and someone who could really turn out otherwise disaffected Democrats to vote against him.